Welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Intimacy Podcast. It's Friday, which means we have Austin back on with us, and today we're flying solo, just the two bachelors, or I shouldn't say bachelors. What's another word? The two man today.
Human, yeah.
Amy was had some other obligations, and so she'll be back next podcast. But still, don't turn this off. This is going to be a great episode today. We are talking a lot today, a little bit more for the men, and we're going to talk about, why husbands or why men turn to porn and other addictive behaviors in marriage. This is something that's touched Amy and I like personally in a lot of ways. This is something that I haven't personally struggled with, but we have a lot of our very close friends and people that we know and love very well that have really struggled with this topic. And we get a lot of our audience reaching out to us about this topic as well, and just wanted to have a good discussion on it, and most importantly, talk to a therapist, someone who is trained to know how to overcome these things. Because as we talk all the time, it's one thing to know about something or communicate about it, but to actually implement the tools to be able to help this. So.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This topic is the reason I became a therapist in part. And I may have shared a little bit of this story, but I'll go into a little deeper, both personally and some motivating factors. So in 2011, when I decided to become a therapist, 2010, we had our first son, and a little bit before that, probably the end of 2009, maybe even the beginning of 2010, I started down a path which eventually became like an addiction to pornography. And um, what's crazy about it is looking back, I wasn't addicted to pornography when I went into school. I did think I was actually. I was identifying as like I'm a porn addict. Now I understand all of that better on multiple levels. But there's a couple pieces that I want to focus on today. One is first the hope of marriage's healing from it, like right off the bat. I
Awesome.
think that's why I became a therapist was we had struggled from the beginning without pornography around sexuality and just the difficulty of like balancing male and female. And I learned a lot of this. Like we both had things that were playing into it that were bigger than just male and female differences. We both had some real significant challenges from childhood that we didn't know affected us and that we didn't know would affect each other. And so about 3.5 years into our marriage, um, our sexuality wasn't working, and I just started to feel tempted. And I remember I was researching online, like how do I create desire in my marriage? How do I help my wife want to be with me? And I mean, this is like 2009, and
And that's a
um,
common thing for men to want to research,
right,
right? So
right,
I think
yeah,
most men are doing that.
yeah. Like I love my wife, and we were connecting emotionally. I was like a very proactive husband, very, very available, very like in, right? And we had all the makings of like we were in love, like we were connecting, and then it was like we were even being sexual, but I didn't understand what I understand now, that whole like desire thing. Like she didn't ever seem to want me,
Hmm.
but she was willing, and we had great intimacy and things. But like long story short, I remember searching like how do I help my wife want me, and it went to like a pornographic site, and it was like I saw stuff like it wasn't intentional. It had like this strong just impact, like just right, like sexuality does. And I had seen pornography as a kid. Like I had seen that. I'll go into some of that history maybe later in the thing, but so I had seen it. I had overcome it. I hadn't like looked for several years, and we were virgins when we got married. I hadn't had sex, and so this whole thing was new. And long story short, like over time, I was tempted a lot of times, like feeling that disconnection from us, rejected. I shouldn't say feeling disconnected. I felt like we were connecting, but then we couldn't like go into intimacy. Like
Yeah.
that was the rub. And so in my mind, it's like, hey, we're best friends and we love each other and we're like
Why
everything's
can't this be
great. Why
great?
can't right? And it was even a challenge because we'd be sexual, but it didn't feel fulfilling. It was kind of that like she's here, but she doesn't.
Yeah.
It was just this disconnect kind of thing. And so long story short, two of my good friends, in 2010, like right around the birth of my first child, they decided to leave their wives, like just pretty like abruptly. And these were like two, I mean, really close friends. We hung out still all the time, even though we were married and our wives were friends. And um, like because my parents had divorced, I was like really impacted. I was like, wait, you can't like. And I did know that pornography played into that, and I didn't understand then what I understand now. And then, fast forward a year and I'm kind of struggling here and there. Like, 4 months go by, 6 months go by, and it wasn't like hardcore pornography. It was like, a rated R movie with nudity or seeing some images. And so that was part of I mean, that was a primary motivation for me to become a therapist was like, one, I want to overcome this pornography temptation. I'd gone to 12 steps for about a year and a half for pornography, like addiction recovery. And looking back, one of the real damaging things, to be honest, was I adopted an identity of being a porn addict. And that brought a lot of shame with it.
Oh yeah.
And shame is a big catalyst for for more struggle and
Yeah,
things like that,
exactly. It's
right?
like, oh, I'm already feeling this way and already doing it. I might as well just,
Right,
who
right.
cares, right?
And so the thing of it was for me, like I never wanted pornography. I had a high sex drive and I was in love with my wife and I was attracted to her and I was a young guy that there was no training on how do you manage your sexuality. I just believed we're in love, we should have a really great sexual relationship. And I think the hook of pornography was it mimicked what I felt like a woman should act like. Like she should have high desire. She should want me all the time. And obviously, I've since learned that that's why pornography is so addictive for men.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
because they're like, oh, this is what it should be, right? This is the
right,
woman should want me. They should desire
right,
me. They should be
right.
sexual.
And so one of the things, even in my schooling, like I have a very unique therapeutic background because I went to school in Las Vegas, and there was 6 men in our program, and I think like 24 women, and all six of the men we were all the same religion, same Christian background. And so a lot of our research and things were in similar realms from spirituality, but we're living in Sin City, Las Vegas, right?
Crazy.
And we had just a very cool kind of opportunity to learn and grow there because right off the bat, like my first clients were like heavy sexual acting out behaviors. Like to this day, I can go to conferences and talk with other therapists and they're like, what? Like you've seen so many people that were like deep in, I'm like, I mean, it's Vegas. Like you just have
Yeah.
there's so much more there that people go beyond pornography, right? But so, long story short, on a personal level, right? Like I would see pornography and it felt like, oh, like somebody would want me that way. And this was part of my own wounding, like that wasn't even aware was there, that I had developed this idea of like sex equals love, which we've talked about a little bit. Like you can be sexual and love's not involved. People do that
Yeah.
all the
Oh
time,
yeah.
right? And so, without going too deep into kind of my own healing journey and recovery, like for me, it was never really about sex. And literally, hundreds of my clients have struggled with pornography or sexual acting out. And it's very rarely about sex. It's typically about I want to feel loved. A lot of people mismanage their emotions, is the words we use. They feel shame, so they turn to pornography. They feel anger, so right? Like you can feel
Yeah.
dysregulated emotionally, and you can go to any drug, alcohol, food, ice cream, whatever, video games, and you shift your emotional state. When I was in school, really heavy in research. Like we were doing some of the early research around internet pornography because it was pretty new, especially like streaming, like video and stuff like that. Before it was like images or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was interesting because the research early on, they said the thing that shifts emotional state the fastest is music. Okay, it's like that first beat, like your emotional state can shift. The second fastest is pornography. Okay. It's like this really rapid, like I can be in any mood and you see, sexuality and your mood shifts, right? And so this is why it's so addictive for men, especially. So I remember in my schooling, we actually had like in one of my classes, we had women in the sex industry that came to our classes and talked about their backgrounds,
Wow.
right? And it wasn't just pornography, like there had been, prostitutes and strippers, and like it was in Vegas, right?
Crazy.
And it's interesting because, right, a lot of these women talked about their own, how did they get into it, childhood trauma, different stuff. What was interesting is the cognitive aspect of understanding that didn't shift the emotional temptation. It's like the head and the emotions disconnect, right?
Hmm.
So I carried a lot of shame further when I would like slip and act out, knowing what I knew for hearing certain stories. But your emotions don't care when you're dysregulated,
Yeah.
right? And so one of the things that was interesting though is like I remember one particular time, part of the discussion in our addiction class, that we had these ladies in the industry, and they said they were talking about their actual sexuality, and they're like, our actual sexuality is nothing like what we do in pornography. And after talking to literally hundreds of women at this point around sexuality, maybe thousands, honestly, at this point,
Hmm.
I started to realize that like what I had seen in pornography was not feminine sexuality. It was a strategic effort where women act like men are sexually
Yeah.
typically, right?
Yeah.
And this is why it's such a hook for a lot of men. And so one of the challenges, and this is like my own journey, was I started to blame my pornography use on my wife. Like, hey, if we could figure out intimacy, I wouldn't struggle with this thing. And I see this with a lot of couples. I think there was a time where my wife felt some pressure and some fear of, okay, I'll be sexual so you don't do things that hurt
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we would be sexual more often, but it still wasn't fulfilling because she wasn't operating from, I love you so much. She was operating from, I don't want you to hurt me,
Obligation or yeah,
right?
duty. Yeah.
It doesn't mean love wasn't there also, but it got entangled. And this is what I've seen with so many couples, right? Where there's multiple things. Like every situation's a little unique. Like I didn't look at pornography for any other reason than feeling rejected. Some people look at it because they're stressed. Some people's sex lives are great, and they
Yeah.
come in and they're like, "Hey, we're like, no, I have no complaints with my wife. I just am really stressed out financially." Or, I mean, there's a variety of reasons, and that's one of the things that's tricky for recovery is people go in and they're told it's like, well, it's because of your childhood trauma, or it's because of your shame, or it's because of this, or it's like everybody's temptation
Everyone's different
journey is
and
different,
unique.
right?
Yeah.
And so, right, there are couples where we have to be aware, like our last episode together, we talked about like high desire, low desire, and what it feels like to be in kind of high desire consistently. And it can feel like that pressure to a spouse a lot of times. And when you're in high desire all the time, temptation is temptation. We
Yeah.
don't we don't control what's tempting to us. We are sexual beings. We are attracted to the opposite sex, men far more than women as far as physically, right?
Hmm.
They kind of joke that like feminine, like female porn is actually like romance novels, right?
Exactly.
Like
It's
it's
so
it's a
true.
way bigger
Yeah.
seller, right? And so for men, like I think one of the pieces is a lot of times men go one of two ways. They go into shame or blame. I did both. I guess there's a third one, or I'm going to call it pride. They pretend it's a non-thing. Okay. We had a lot of discussion in our clinics and communities around what if it's not a moral issue for you? Is it still damaging to a marriage? Right? Research shows yes, both on a psychological, neurological level. I don't want to heighten fear, but like it affects you, like everything does.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but even when it's not a moral issue, so I'm in Vegas, and I remember like I'll be transparent with this because it will set the stage for I want to call it the repair kind of component. I remember having a couple, and this is I'll keep this less graphic, but I remember the wife or the girlfriend, I guess, she came in and she said she had a belief, right, that I think is common. Men need sex, and so she had said, I'm gonna be out of town, and you can kind of do whatever you need. Just don't lie to me about it." And he's like, "Oh no, I wouldn't look at anything," kind of thing, right? Well, he did. Even though she said it was okay, he felt this like, no, I can't tell her. She found out he was lying, and that was the big wound. Was
Hmm.
this is a really big part of this for couples is the honesty component. So if men struggle with pornography, they're very uncommon to say, "Hey, I just messed up." They're afraid of getting hurt or hurting their wife. They're afraid of getting left. They're afraid of being rejected more, right? Like everybody at this point knows marriages that have been destroyed by pornography.
Right.
You know. And so the common pattern is a guy falls into it. A good dude, not wanting it, not part of his value, but he's tempted for, whatever reason that can be in part like our relationship isn't functioning well or whatever. It does not justify the action, but the words we tend to use is it is understanding. We can see why, the absence of connection in your marriage leaves a hole
Hmm.
and there's a void to fill, not the void of no intimacy only, also the void of the pain of not being loved and connected for some
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so there can be this vulnerability. And so what happens is guys oftentimes will fall into this for a variety of reasons. Then they want to hide it because they don't want to get left or they didn't mean to, or right. And then it progresses over time. So a lot of times I would meet couples where it had been going on for several years and it had been discovered accidentally by a spouse. That trauma is way higher because now it feels like deception. How can I trust you? Right? All this things. And
Betrayal for a long period of time.
yep. And so, before I moved to St. George and started some of the things I do now, I directed two different clinics that's all we did was work with couples with sexual, betrayal. And what's cool is, and I've shared this before, like I've seen a lot of couples come back stronger, better. They use this like destruction to go, we still love each other. How do we repair? And I would love to say like there's a prescription for everybody. There's not, right? Everybody's got different things that play into it. But the core ingredients of building a healthy marriage are strong enough to help couples even heal when there's been an active addiction and betrayal. I've been a part of that. I've seen that. I've experienced that in my own relationship where right, I had taken my wife to the depths of pain in many ways. And I also felt my own depths of pain, and not just on the addiction level, but also the relational level, right? And seeing that like you can repair, your love can transcend these types of challenges. And so the pornography component, I guess the place I want to say here is a lot of men have done different, let's call it recovery type things. Wives have done things in that realm. And me and my wife included, our therapeutic journey actually made it harder. And I've seen this a lot. And I think part of that is twofold. A lot of well-meaning therapists and church groups and different things, right? We don't really fully understand internet pornography, right? Like this is this new thing, and all of a sudden, a bunch of people who probably wouldn't have become addicted, they were not going to go to the store and buy a movie. They were not, right? All of a sudden, it's in your laptop, and then all of a sudden, it's like in your
Yeah.
phone and on Instagram, and it's right. It's like I would have never sought that out. It hit me,
It
right?
came to me. Yeah.
Right. And I think understanding like there's there's evil, there's an adversary, there's strategic design. I mean, in some of my training spaces, like I remember a guy he had worked at Playboy. Okay. He was a recruiter at Playboy. He came and spoke to me not in a school training, but in one of my therapeutic trainings. And he talked of the process, how they would get women over time to enter into hardcore pornography. And this man had like a Jesus come to Jesus interaction, and he changed his ways, and he felt like I gotta like repent and change this
Yeah.
stuff. But I remember one of the things he talked about is he's like, we are very strategic in how to get men hooked on pornography, and we know it will destroy marriages, right? He also, not him, it was the same training, but another person had come from the technology world. And he's like, I was part of a group that was creating games for kids, like, iPad games or whatever. And he said, we're learning how to manipulate the dopamine receptors. I mean, this is early. Okay, we all
Man,
are kind of more aware of it in 2026. It's like, oh, yeah, you figured out how to hijack,
yeah, that's
right? Where
amazing.
everybody's addicted to scrolling. This was early. Okay, so I remember it was like we figured out how we can manipulate kids' dopamine receptors so they're way more vulnerable to become addicted to pornography the first time they see it. I mean,
Man.
this was strategic stuff, right? And so, one of the things that I think is how do you help each other stay safe? And we have to be transparent. Pornography is not just a struggle for men. It's intentionally created for women now. There's pornography for women that it's much more, appealing to the feminine side of sexuality, more romantic, whatever. Books. I think the romantic books are like way high sellers,
Oh yeah.
and so as a husband and wife, it's like, how do we protect ourselves against this? And I think the place where I would start, kind of going back to the last podcast, is how do we develop ourselves where we have some mastery? It's not white knuckling, it's not willpower, it's expanding capacity to sit with like challenging emotions, challenging relational dynamics. I'll be brief here, but one of the things that truly actually helped me the most, and I mean, I've read like at least 100 books on recovery and trauma and all these things that play into it. It was cold plunging while thinking of triggering situations and mentally and physically going, this cold is more painful than other things I feel. I'm learning to sit in the cold and not, I can't escape. I'm in the cold, right?
Yeah.
It like shifted something where I could feel a temptation. I was like it gave me space, right? It was like I can see that that's tempting. I can sit with this. What is this? I'm feeling rejected. I'm feeling, I mean, honestly, I don't trigger emotionally a lot, and I very rarely trigger, like, let's call it sexually, right? But yesterday, my wife's out of town and we're texting, and then she doesn't respond. But then I see she's responding to my kid. I was like, right. And just this little voice creeps in of like, you're not that important, Austin. Remember, and I've done a lot of work there. Like, I know
Yeah.
I matter. I know I'm important, right? But because of a variety of the things I've trained myself with, like, I was able to catch that thought and be like, I see what that is, right? In the past, that very easily could have led to like, oh, now I'm sitting at the computer
Yeah.
numbing out kind of thing. You know what I mean? And so, um, I guess the place I want to offer hope is one, if you're struggling with, pornography behavior, viewing it, whether it's addiction level or not, that can be overcome. There's a lot of ways that a man can learn to manage his sexual desire, self-mastery. I can talk some more about that in a minute. But there needs to be a knowledge that like you aren't ruled by your sexuality. You're stronger. Your spirit is stronger than that. God is capable of helping you overcome that. Not just managing the temptation. Like I talk all the time with guys like let's get to the point where it's not tempting anymore. Like and part of that shift is going like not just cognitively but emotionally. That beautiful thing on the screen equals destruction. It
Yeah.
equals disconnection. It doesn't bring what I want, just temporary. Now you can cognitively understand that. We need it to go deeper, emotionally, somatically.
Well, and I
Um,
think too, not only to the men out there that are maybe struggling with it, but also the men that are listening to this that are saying, "Well, I don't struggle with this." I think it's so important to also like do preemptive stuff, right? Like I remember I was praying, and Amy and I were talking, and it came up somehow that I'm like, oh yeah, I pray every night that I won't have the temptation of seeing
mhm.
pornography. And she's like, why would you pray for that if it's not a problem? And I'm like, because I don't want it to ever become a problem, even though, I was just like, and I think there's preemptive things that we can do. I know in our marriage, like one of the things is Amy and I don't watch like rated R movies or movies that have that kind of stuff in, because if I'm not putting that in front of me, then I'm not giving me those desires, right?
Right.
Like, and so I think there's a lot of preemptive stuff that we can do to, also keep that out of our lives as well too. But it's interesting. Like we've talked to a lot of couples, we've had a lot of interviews on previous episodes with people that have had porn addictions and things like that. And the interesting thing is people are struggling with this, but then they're like, yeah, they have no problem going and watching rated R movies with intense sex scenes, right? Like or things like that. So I think it's so important to like just try to, keep those things out of your life as well too, if you're whether you're struggling with it or whether you don't ever want it in your life.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, early on, I made a decision like I'm not gonna be on social media. Like,
Yeah.
I remember, I was in my undergraduate when some of these things were new, Facebook and Instagram or not even Instagram yet, Twitter at the time, and right, we were talking about how are these things going to impact things, and I may have shared this on the podcast before, so I'll keep it really short. But in my therapy master's program, we were starting to see the fallout. It was like all these people were connecting to people they hadn't seen in 15 years,
Yeah.
but they had romantic relationships with in high school when you're not dealing with kids and work, and then your marriage is struggling because you're doing life, and all these people are like connecting and having emotional affairs and meeting up and right. So I made a decision early on. It's like I'm not going to be on social media. I'm not, I made a decision early on. It's like I'm not going to work with women like necessarily on their own, right? We had a clinical context, and I was almost always couples therapist or the man's therapist. But I think, right, as a couple, like how do we protect ourselves against danger? Not just, I mean, pornography, yes, but I know a lot of people that would say their spouse's use of Facebook or Instagram is equally as
Mhm.
destructive. It's like if you're checked out, you're checked out.
It's interesting to say that because we did a poll on this exact subject, and we asked the women, well, we asked both men and women, but we said, do you feel like social media is as addictive to women as porn is to men? And it was like 70 something percent said yes. And that was the women, also saying that. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting you say that.
This is what I think we need to understand. It's meant to be. Our food's meant to be. Like I'm not
Yeah,
like some
yeah.
conspiracy guy. Like it clearly they know what they're doing to hijack our
Yeah,
emotions,
exactly.
right? All marketing. If you study marketing, like they know how to manipulate your fears. They know how to speak to your desires. They know how to create a response chemically, not just emotionally, right?
Yep.
Where right? And so, um, us being aware, like, how do these things impact me? Does it heighten fear? Does it heighten anxiety? We're taking in all sorts of messages and being able to say, like, how is that impacting me? Right? So, I get to work with people in a broad spectrum of belief systems, right? You can have like the woman that I worked with earlier. She's like, no, I believe men need sex and I believe it's okay if you look at pornography. I'm not affected versus a woman that goes like, if you see a woman in, workout clothes, I feel like you betrayed me, like
Yeah. Yeah.
right. And so I've seen all these in between things, and I think that's where, as a husband and wife, you have to understand your context, right? Like depending on what you grew up believing and what you believe now, different things are going to hit and impact that, and you being able to consciously choose what type of marriage do we want, how do we want to create it, and then how do we protect it.
I think what you just said is really important. Sorry, I don't mean to
No,
interrupt,
you're good.
but I
No,
think
you're
what
good.
you said is just really important because you see so many couples, and not even just in this area, but other areas where they don't know where the line is that's going to get crossed, right? They're like, I had no idea that would affect you, and the wife is just like, I can't believe you did that. You completely betrayed me, right? And I think it's so what you just said is really important. I think it's so important for couples to establish boundaries and talk about like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in our marriage, and how do we handle these things. And so,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I went from Las Vegas. I don't talk about this often. I went from Las Vegas to a place where it was highly religious, right? Like every client was Christian and believed in the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, probably 100% of my clients were in that context after I left Vegas. And it was interesting because that clinic, I mentioned this before, we would have up to 36 new couples calling a week,
wow.
with primarily it was pornography, but there was affairs there and emotional things too. There was sometimes, a little more. beyond that type of behavior, like I had seen in Vegas. But I remember like it was really interesting for me because I went from a Vegas where a lot of really extreme things had happened, and some of the wives weren't as impacted as I thought they would be. And then I went to a place where I'd call it sometimes much lesser behavior had happened. Like it was like, I don't want to minimize this, but it was like he looked at the Sports Illustrated or he saw a fitness model on Instagram, and the feeling was he'd had an affair kind of
Yeah.
feeling, right?
Yeah.
And so I started to be, I'm like, how do I reconcile like there's differences in all of us? And this was the challenge between men and women. I had some men that were like I didn't know this would affect you, and like, and all of a sudden someone's in trauma and they're like really having, PTSD type things. But the place I guess I want to speak to that, I mentioned like someone overcoming the behavior,
Hmm.
and like hope for healing there. Same thing for the hurt partner. Some people do go into like a trauma response. We hear the betrayal trauma language. Um, I was a part of the group that actually like started, talking about that term more and more. One of my colleagues, we co-directed a clinic. He's, I think, still to this day, the primary trainer for the governing body that does sexual addiction recovery. Like he is the lead therapist that trains betrayal trauma healing for women. And
Hmm.
so, I'd been in this world for a long time therapeutically and also in my own journey. And so I was able to get sober. I was struggling, went through a program, had like 4 months sobriety, 6 months, and I was never like very consistent because I always blocked it. Like I didn't even have the password for my own computer at home. Like I never wanted that thing, but I did always have a high sex drive and I always had some vulnerability, right? And so I was very careful to protect. But I remember getting to a place where I had several years of sobriety and I was directing this clinic, that we were one of the leading, places in the world. We had clients come from out, out of the country and different things, and then I relapsed, and it was pretty devastating for me. And I worked through it and talked with, my team. Like they knew, like part of my ability to be helpful was I'd lived
Yeah.
that journey, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wasn't, I understood what it was like to sit with a betrayed wife because I'd done it, right? I understood the pain of the underneath place that led men to act out those types of things. And then I remember a little while went by, and I was actually really connected in our church group, and I was in a leadership position. I relapsed again. And I just remember like the shame in that context was like higher than anything I'd
Hmm.
ever felt. And it's interesting because a lot of people, when you talk about like pornography, sexual acting out, like shame is the emotion that we talk about the most. And I think what's important for a lot of people to understand is there can be shame about the behavior, like I feel bad that I looked, or I feel bad that I hurt my spouse. A lot of times, shame is the consistent emotion that leads to someone using as well.
Yeah.
So, right, and let's just use this context. If I'm feeling not good enough as a spouse, right, that's the message of shame. Like, I feel not enough. I feel like my spouse doesn't love me. She doesn't want me. So I'm living in that state. And then I have something that makes that go away temporarily. I view the thing that's tempting. I feel sexual feelings. I have an orgasm, whatever. Then my shame doubles, right?
Yep.
So we often say it's like pain times two. It's like I have the original pain, then I take the pain to something that only takes it temporarily, and it's like, let me hand you 5 times back, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is how addiction furthers. It doesn't make logical sense. Emotionally, it works. I feel like garbage, now I don't. I feel like more garbage, now I don't. So it escalates over time. This is where you get people where it kind of has this flip where it's now just to feel okay, I need the behavior. Where in the beginning, it's like, I don't feel good, I do this to feel better. it shifts where I only feel good when I'm doing this. That's kind of
Interesting. Yeah,
true
that's
addiction language is this. So I don't mention this often, but I will here. Like part of my wounding was my dad's acting out, and that led to divorce with my parents. And I didn't know any of that as a kid. I learned some of that when I was older, and so I was really motivated not to have that impact my marriage and my family, and it did. It carried out anyway, and in a strange way, I remember being in a 12-step group early on. I'd probably only seen pornography in my marriage, I don't know, maybe twice, something like that. And I remember these two guys saying they were grateful for their addiction. I was like, you guys are stupid. Like, stop it. I remember like saying that in my head, like, you guys are dumb, right? Um, and they explained why, and they said like it forced them to become closer to God than they ever would have chosen to be. Like it was like, I can't do this on my own. I need God to come. And so they were grateful for that intimacy with God. And I look back and I would not wish pornography on any couple. Like it devastated our marriage. It took us both to the depths of pain, not just once, but many times. And I also noticed that like through that struggle, I've gained the ability to know how to help in that context. And
exactly. Yeah,
and and so I think right for any couple that's experiencing this, the kind of the core message is like there's absolutely hope. Like and the fact that this has happened in your relationship doesn't make you like we are built to become addicted to things. Like that's it's not even a necessarily a human flaw. Like part of the way our nervous system is built and our subconscious mind is it's meant to go, oh, we do this to manage, I'll just do it automatically. That's where when addiction really develops, it's just an automatic behavior.
yeah,
It's negative emotion, okay, cool. And you're just doing it. We call it impulsive or compulsively. And so to reduce shame, like one of the things that was really helpful for me to reduce shame was to go, okay, I could be addicted to anything. Mine happens to be pornography, which does feel like the worst for most people. Like, I mean, I've sat with guys struggling with heroin and alcohol and women too. And typically the people that carry the highest shame is pornography and sexuality. They feel like, perverts are worthless or right. Where drug and alcohol, there tends to be more like, hey, that's not okay behavior, but it's not connected to sexuality. So
yeah,
there's
yeah.
right less shame. But I think the understanding for people like people heal all the time. People overcome addictions. I think there's this maybe lie that pervades these recovery communities where it's like people don't heal, once an addict, always an addict. I remember going to 12-step meetings and like the manual would say, we believe in full recovery. And then people in the meeting would be like, I'm gonna have this addiction forever and I've been sober 20 years and I'm still an addict. It's like, no, like
Oh,
people recover. And so there's a book called The Biology of Desire. And the author in that, the research behind it was I'm gonna find a group of people that have experienced addiction that no longer struggle with it and don't have that as part of their identity. And it's interesting. He said like 75% of people that like what he said 75% of people overcome like meth, which is one of the hardest ones to overcome drugs. And he said, and like I can't remember the exact statistic. It was like 80% of those they just kind of walk away from it. Like they kind
yeah,
of outgrow it, right?
yeah.
And so the place I'm trying to go with this is what was really helpful for me was to go, that's not who I am. Like that's something that started for me as a 5-year-old little boy, and I had no idea what it was. And then I become a member of a church and I overcome the behavior for many, many years. Then I'm dealing with a struggling marriage around sexuality. I fall back into it. I identify as like I'm an addict. And I came to this place where I'm like, that's not who I am. I'm capable of creating a healthy lifestyle, a healthy relationship, and I can walk away from this thing. That doesn't mean temptation doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that I don't struggle at times with desire and rejection, but I've done a lot of work where very rarely do I feel that like way that I used to.
Yeah.
I remember, I'll be
Amazing.
brief with this, but remember telling a friend of mine, I said, I hit this place in my own journey where I'd done some emotional work, some things around my past, and I remember saying to my friend, I said, "This is the first time since I've been married that I've experienced not having constant desire." And he's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I've always been in a state of desire. Even if we'd like been sexual, it didn't mean my desire for the next time wasn't there
Yeah.
right away, right?" And when I had that, I'll call it a release. It was like something released in me where it was like a belief and a belief with an emotion that like we needed to be sexual in a certain frequency, a certain like intensity is what I'd call it, where it felt passionate before I could feel fulfilled. And so we would be sexual and I wouldn't feel fulfilled. I wouldn't leave feeling loved or connected. And I had done some work and it shifted. And I was like, I don't I don't feel desire. I love my wife. I still want to be intimate, but I don't feel that kind of constant thing. And I was like, man, do people live like this? And I had this compassion of like, it's interesting to not feel desire, and a lot of men understand the constant desire. I think we've talked about that before. And so, for we know like that's part of why we're doing this episode. Like pornography is a real struggle. It's there, it's in your face. Obviously there's hardcore pornography, there's nudity, but you can see people fully clothed that, you know, create arousal, create
Yeah. Yeah.
desire.
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
And so, right, I a lot of times when guys are in recovery, they set their own lines and things, and I always tend to like let's set it way far upstream because if you're on Instagram and you come across an attractive woman, you're going to have a feeling come with that. And you're going to have to wrestle with temptation. Whereas if you, right, and I think you can come to a place, I know you can come to a place because I've experienced this where you can interact with an attractive woman and you're not thinking sexually and you're not managing it. You're not wrestling with it, right? Like I can go to the gym now and I know there's girls dressed scantily all over the place. I'm not having to like, oh, how do
Yeah.
I? I'm like,
It's not a struggle.
right. It's like I'm at the gym, I see attractive women, but my body's not triggering anything. It's not going into like lust mode or desire mode. It's like, okay, she's attractive, or I don't even notice it a lot of times, which is great. But there was a time I could hardly function in a gym, right? Probably, you know what I mean? Without having to go like, okay, how do I manage? Or I'd feel like now I got to go home and have sex or whatever. And I wanted to get to a place where my sexuality was about love, right? It was about we're connected and I want to go to this place because we're connected, because we're in love, not because I just have high desire. And I'll share this. One of the things that was helpful for me is my sister is a therapist as well, and she became a therapist after I was. And we have very open discussions, and my family's pretty open around sexuality. And so all of my siblings, me and all of my siblings, we are all the high desire
Really?
brothers and sisters. Yeah. And all of our spouses are low desire, right? It's like, okay, we just have high desire apparently, right? But being able to like have conversations with my siblings, especially my sister from a clinical level, and understanding that it didn't matter that I was a male and she was a female, we felt the same stuff in our relationships and our spouses felt similar. And
Interesting.
that helped shift some of my perspective. And also, like, just talking with a ton of women around sexuality in the couple context, I was like, okay, I had bought into some maybe unrealistic fantasy of what it had to be like. And when I realized that wasn't like it was overboard. Like I believe in ultimate intimacy. I believe in a great sexual marriage, but my vision of it was too
Yeah.
ramped up
Yeah.
probably, right? And I was able to come to a place and I don't feel like I settled. I don't feel like I'm like, okay, Alex, I came to a place where I'm like, this this can be healthy. This can work. Like
More realistic. Yeah.
right. And so couples can get there. sexuality is complex. Trauma is complex, but the good news is both heal. And I feel fortunate, like in a therapeutic context, to start my career where there was trauma and addiction together. Those two are typically the most complex individually. And then you work with them in a couple context, right? I talk with therapists I know, and it's like when you treat people in that level of depth, they still have all the other stuff too, right?
Yeah.
And so it made it easier to be like when a couple comes in here or here or here, it's like we can go down here if that's where you are, and we can help you all the way up to the top. And I've seen that so many times, Nick, like couples in hell, like not functioning. They're both in trauma responses, and they learn to regulate and co-regulate. They learn to connect again. They learn to create safety. One of the things we often work with early on, I see some women become, we call it hypersexual in response to the betrayal. And they're like, I don't understand why I feel so sexual finding out he betrayed me. And it's like, it's not because of connection and love. It's your sexuality is ramped up because of fear. We need to handle the fear and we need to do the repair work,
Interesting. Yeah.
right? Where you're being intimate again, not to protect yourself. You're being intimate because you feel protected, you feel safe. And a lot of times we're working with men. Like you got to restore safety, you got to restore trust, you got to demonstrate that you're mastering your sexuality and you're reserving it for her and you're not putting pressure on her,
Yeah.
which I wish I didn't make that mistake, Nick, of like blaming my wife and creating this thing where it was like, I didn't mean to, but it was kind of this message of like, if you're not being intimate all the time, you're at risk of me betraying you. And I think this is the delicate balance. Um, because some wives will be like, "Hey, I'm checked out sexually and don't betray me." It's like, well, it's
Yeah.
kind of an impossible situation when you understand sexuality, when you understand desire.
Well, and what we have someone we work with that says what you feed grows and what you starve dies, and I think that's
Hmm.
so true. Like you can't say, hey, don't we're not gonna have sex, but also don't betray me, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean,
Hmm.
like we talk about in other episodes, finding that balance. But one of the things I love about these weekly podcasts is, every time it's talking about hope and that people can overcome this because I truly think that they can. I mean, whether it's what we're talking about today, pornography, or whether it's anything else in marriage, or just having the marriage that you want, that you offer or talk about all the time of the hope of having something better because you can. And I'm
Yep.
here to say from personal experience that you can have the marriage that you always want. You can overcome pornography if that's an issue for you. You can do these things, and it's just having the right not only knowledge but tools to be able to, know what to do with the knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
And so,
Let me share this. I on a different podcast, a colleague of mine interviewed a couple I had worked with. They were willing to be very open with their situation, and it's a little bit unique, and I'll share it briefly because it demonstrates what can happen. And long story short, he had started down the pornography path, but then he ended up being with prostitutes, and eventually he had an affair, and he fell in love, was what he was calling it, with his affair partner, and was going to leave his wife. And he had been caught, and he had been left, and they had come back together, and he was still interacting with the affair partner, but not in person. Like she was reaching out to him. And this had happened, I guess, round three. I came into the picture. They contacted me. And so the wife was, I mean, done, right? Like, I already took you back, right? Like, and so I did some intensive work with them. Like they came into town and I was pretty limited. I said I can meet with you 4 hours tomorrow. And they traveled. They drove like 3 hours to meet with me. And I said I can meet with you another 4 hours next week. And they came again. Like we did some intensive stuff. And I worked with them over, a couple months and we did some intensive work. And I remember one thing the wife said. Um, she said him having an affair and having sex with another woman is challenging, and that's one thing. But she said to know that he fell in love with her and chose her over me, was like gonna leave me. She's like, that's another level. And I remember doing an individual session with the man, and I only did one. Like I try to do everything together if I can, but he was not in a fantastic place. He was actually feeling torn. Like it's harder with my wife. This woman still loves me. He had feelings, right? And I remember one of the things I told him is I said, you're calling what you have with this other woman love. And I said, it can't be love. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, love is a gift from God, and God won't bless you with love in an affair. Like
Yeah.
that's not, you're not identifying the right emotion. I said, there's a combination of some probably lust here, there's some caretaking, whatever. But we did this work that shifted him emotionally, and he was able to come to this place, a couple places. One, he was able to connect with himself and say, I know who I want to be, and I'm not that man right now. I'm committed to that. He was able to connect to his wife, and like she's worth the repair process. She deserves that. And it was interesting because he also was able to say, I can release this other woman. She's also not getting the best version of me. If I left my wife and with
Yeah.
her, that wouldn't work either. And he did all that work. And again, it has to be like deep, right? So this was a process. But we kept working together, and they started to repair and rebuild trust, him and his wife. And one of the things that was really impressive that I rarely see happen is the wife was able to come to this place, and she said, I'm not responsible for this. Like, you made your choices. But she was able to say, based on conversation, she was able to go, I see how I started to neglect our relationship. I see how I wasn't available to you. I wasn't hearing you. I had not checked out, but he felt like he checked out. And so it was interesting because she used the word, she's like, I needed to repent for the ways I had betrayed our marriage too. And I was like, that is
Yeah.
rare maturity, to have your husband in love with another woman having an affair and you be able to take that accountability and say, I was also,
Yeah. What part did I play in this?
yeah, and again, she wasn't responsible for his behavior, but she did take responsibility for, I see where I had started to neglect our relationship too. And in that space where love isn't flourishing, things can come in. And
Yeah.
that's what I think a lot of couples need to see. Like pornography and affairs might be at this end, but a lot of couples are having lesser behaviors that are doing the same thing. We're not connecting, we're not being intimate, we're not in love, we're not getting along. Where I tend to come is like, does it matter what's making it not work? It's not working. If it's pornography, we can heal it. If it's childhood trauma, we can heal it. If it's, the cell phone, if it's finance, like if you had a child die, like whatever it is, you too can heal and come back together and create something healthy. It takes two people taking responsibility, not necessarily for how you got to divided, two people taking responsibility to say, let's unite and create something better. When that happens, couples can overcome everything, honestly. So,
Well, and I think that's a great way to wrap this up with exactly what you said for all the couples out there listening. Like, one of the preventative ways is, maybe put forth a little bit more effort in your relationship on both ends, right? Sit down as a couple and, whether it's once a week or once a month and say, what can we do better in our marriage? How can I be a better husband? How can I be a better wife? Because I really do believe when a husband or wife kind of starts to drift off and gets into other behaviors, there's no question that, if things aren't good here as one, the door's open to kind of going into those other behaviors. And I'm not saying that always happens, but, we hear from so many couples that that's why they choose to maybe go that direction, or that's why they gravitate to that because they are lacking something in their relationship. So I think, again, as couples, the couples out there listening, maybe just, talk to each other and say, what can we do better as a couple? And maybe where are we neglecting the relationship and having those good discussions as well too. So
cool. Yeah, I think we've offered a lot of hope. I'll also be transparent. I mean, maybe transparent is the wrong word. Like, it's important for people to understand that, like, the pain of anything connected to pornography and betrayal and trauma, like, it's the most devastating relationally. I remember one of my professors when I was in school, I told him what I wanted to do because of where me and my wife, what we'd experienced, and the reason for my parents' divorce and how that impacted me as a kid. And I remember he said, and he wasn't like shying me away. He's like, I just want you to know you've chosen the hardest population to help. He's like, when there's been sexual betrayal in a marriage, it's the hardest to help those two people
Yeah.
both heal individually and together and to heal the sexuality. But having done that for many, many years and to see the success, like it's not like one or two. Like I would say 95% of the couples I work with have success, and it's not because of me. It's because they have committed and they do adopt a belief we can do this, and we provide the tools and the treatment and the things that are necessarily, but they're the ones rebuilding a marriage. They're the ones rebuilding safety and trust. I think what I'm able to convey is like there's a path. Like you can do this. And so for anybody listening to this, whether they've struggled with pornography or betrayal or whatever or not, knowing like you can create a healthy marriage. Any two people can do that. I believe that for sure. So
Yeah, I do as well too. So, well,
cool.
thank you so much, Austin. We sure appreciate your time today. And if this is something you guys are struggling with out there or need a little help or someone to talk to, please reach out to us. We can put you in touch with Austin. And Austin, we really appreciate the podcast today and appreciate all of you listening. And also feel free to email us, amy@ultimateintimacy.com, if there's a subject you want to hear Austin and us discuss on a future podcast episode. We love hearing from you. Reach out to us. And so we appreciate all of you listening. And until next time.